All right, guys, welcome back to the WRPF podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uslar. Episode 17. We have already a returning guest, so to speak, Garrett Fear. All right. Garrett on the last episode, it was a short episode. He was my assistant meet director for the Ghost Clash. We talked some stuff on that. He kept it super serious, super professional. I loved it. But if you guys have been around powerlifting for a little while now, you knew Garrett as someone very different a few years ago. Okay. Now, modern day Garrett wears glasses, extremely professional, well spoken, and the director of development for the WRPF. But no, 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 no. He was not always this same Garrett. All right. So we're gonna have some fun. I want to hear the Garrett Fear story. I know some fun facts about his life that are just absolutely crazy. So I want to dive into it. You guys hear some things you already know about him, some things you didn't know about him, and ultimately where he is now in his life, in his role in the WRPF, and absolutely killing it. So Garrett, welcome back.
Hey, hello. First off, the glasses are blue light glasses. When I'm at home working, I'm in front of like six screens and I started having crazy migraines. All right. So I had to figure something out. And once I started wearing blue light glasses, because I used to wear blue light glasses for video games, once I started wearing blue light glasses again, it made a huge difference. So that's the glasses. Okay. Yeah, man, you're right. You have a good point. I was a little shit for a long time. I started powerlifting when I was like 16 years old. I started competing when I was like 18. I did some like unsanctioned stuff, but whatever. It was like 10 years straight, pretty much, a full straight decade. Through some of like the most important growing periods of my life. Um, I talked about this a little bit before, but I started lifting weights actually kind of for more vain reasons. I was addicted to drugs pretty young. A lot of you may know this, but I'm one of 17 kids. We're not Catholic, we're not Amish, we're not Mormon. We were just a big poor. My parents, my dad came from a big family.
Hold
My
on,
dad's
I
mom
gotta
is
stop you there because this is the way you explained it to me the first time I met you, and I love telling this story. All right, we'll censor this if you guys need to cover your ears. Cover your ears. First time I met you was at the 2018 Kern U.S. Open. All right, you were there competing. Wild child, walking around with your eyes all buggy, all over the place. We're talking at one point. Next thing I know, you just getting a nosebleed. I got a nosebleed. I gotta go. Just disappeared. And then another time, we're there with Hayden and his parents. These really nice Canadians. And you're like, yeah, I have 17 brothers and sisters. And they turn and look at you. They're like, oh, wow, really? 17 brothers and sisters? And you just put it a really nice, yeah, they were not Christian. That you just said, yeah, my parents like to fuck.
like the fuck. Yeah, I used to say that a lot, man.
And
And
now you say
it,
it very elegantly. So
it was, well, honestly, I thought it was a good bit because
yes.
a lot of the times people would be like, "Oh, your parents must be busy," and then like my response was always "or bored."
Right.
That was like always my response. So yeah, man, there has been a lot of change in how I present certain things, but yeah. So really, just it's just a different upbringing, kind of a different lifestyle. Like, the way I like to think about it now is like my family was like we were always like a generation or two behind from like what was happening in like modern America, whether it was via income, via what resources we had available to us. It was just a very very different situation, very different upbringing. But because of that, I just didn't have a lot of supervision growing up, and I'm also like the middle child. So yeah, I got involved in drugs pretty young. Like in hindsight, I think that was probably the best way it could have happened. Um, when you don't have real responsibilities, um, a drug addiction is a very different thing versus when you do. You don't really feel like the walls are ever closing in when you're a kid on drugs until you have to really be involved in the real world in society.
I
And
Same with me, and I've said that many times before. It was good that it got out of my system, even though it fucked up the upbringing, fucked up the teenage
yeah,
years, messed up so many of those normal experiences, forces you to mature in a different way. But at least it didn't destroy your life where you ended up in prison. When things
yeah,
actually can hit the fan.
yeah. If I was an adult, when I had, I think certain people they kind of do have a predisposition to be they have to have a higher likelihood to be addicted to drugs. And I think I'm one of those people. And I think, a lot of people don't ever really know that is what their predisposition is until it's too late. And I do see the fortunate circumstance for myself in figuring that out when I was young. Because I'm not a person I will probably not ever, like, I'll never be like a quote unquote sober recovered addict. I will always, drink socially and party from time to time and do those things. And but I think that's the way I have to operate. It's like just kind of finding that balance for myself. Um, and so it really came to my addiction really was at its height when I was about 15 years old. I was sick a lot, and I just was caring less and less about the what were supposed to be the important aspects of my life at that age. And basically, through vanity, I just didn't like the way I looked. I decided to start lifting weights and get off drugs. And so I did that. And very quickly into lifting weights, I realized I kind of didn't care about how I looked. I just wanted to be strong because I was so weak. I was so weak, dude. My like first time maxing on a bench press, like 2 months into like training consistently, like I failed a 65-pound bench press. And I was like 6'1" at the time. And I was like 140 pounds, 150 pounds by this point. And I failed a 65-pound bench press. And within minutes after, one of like the high-level volleyball players at my high school, like was in our school facility training, and she like benched like 95 for like a couple of reps.
Sweet.
I was like, yeah. So that's when I really like dove into strength, and pretty quickly like found programs to do. The first program I ever did was an old TSA program that was like online in like some shitty format, and it was a solid program, and that really kick-started things for me. And once I really started powerlifting, I kind of realized I had a lot of potential to become a pretty good lifter. Um, so like pretty quickly, I had some pretty awesome accomplishments, like the Kern, for example.
Well, just to interject really quick, something also, if you guys don't know this about Garrett, Garrett is, you hear the way he speaks now, how he is now, he carries himself very well. You're a baby, right? You're 25.
26, yeah,
26. Okay, just turned 26, whatever it is. But so when you're talking about when you first started, it's different than a lot of the other people that I've interviewed that are closer to 30, whatever it may be. Powerlifting was already getting a lot of traction at this point. There was guys like the TSA guys around. These programs were readily available online. This is probably this is like around 2015-ish, probably, right?
2013.
2013. Okay.
So it was in like that midway point. So like, for example, like West Side Conjugates, Max Effort, Dynamic Efforts, bands, chains.
Cube Method was the first program I ever followed, which was like
Brandon Lilly, Cube Method was still pretty popular. Swedes Fifth Set was pretty popular, but so were some of like the more like IPF style stuff, USAPL stuff that is now kind of a little more mainstream. Was like kind of getting more popular, but at the time, the IPF, USAPL, drug tested powerlifting as a whole was very elitist. So even when I was a natural athlete, I never wanted to compete there ever. But yeah, no, it was in the kind of a transition stage. But I liked the more like at the time, I liked that kind of like hardcore stuff. So like I actually kind of fell more into that kind of stuff when I started, which ultimately like years down the road ended up being a big contributing factor to like my injuries. But I was talking about some of the accomplishments I made pretty early. 4 or 5 years into my powerlifting career, I was the youngest competitor at the 2018 US Open. I was the youngest guy competing, and I was also the fucking stupidest.
Yes.
And I was the biggest fucking little douche canoe. And I thought I deserved the world. I thought I was supposed to get a ton of recognition. And it was a really awful mentality to have. And the mentality I try to help younger lifters steer away from, or not necessarily younger in age, but more so in younger in training experience. I try to help them kind of move away from that. Because it's not productive. It's not productive to think you deserve notoriety or attention or any of those things. It's not productive. If anything, it's probably led to me pushing in ways I shouldn't have pushed, and ultimately hurting myself in certain ways that are really hard to come back from. I was fortunate in the sense I never had to have a major surgery or anything like that. but more so the types of things that never go away. Um, as an athlete, I did some really cool things. I was really happy to be competing, but I let it dominate my entire life. I'd be at work and all I would be thinking about is like my training session. And all I'd be thinking about is what I'm going to do that week, that month, that meet. And I think there's something to be said for the positive effects of that mentality. But there's also a lot to be said for what the negative runoff can be. We've all kind of experienced that. There's this. When I got into powerlifting, if you guys go to YouTube and you type in powerlifting motivation as a YouTube video, you'll find this video that has that like it starts out with
Remember Dan Green's in that one, right?
it was the one where I think there's a Metallica song in the background, and
yeah,
like Mark Bell has a little bit of a talking point. Brandon Lilly has a talking point, but when Brandon Lilly is talking, he talks about like dropping out of school because he had a meet, and like when George Lehman is talking, he's talking about like in order to be a successful powerlifter, like you have to be fucking crazy. And that was how things were pushed for a long time. But if you look at a lot of like elite athletics and sports as a whole, that doesn't have to be the case. It can actually be quite the opposite. There will always be people who that is the approach they have to take, but it doesn't have to be the case. And I think for the majority of people, it is a really unhealthy approach. And you develop a very negative relationship with athletics as a whole when it's all or nothing, truly all or nothing. A lot of people will say it's all or nothing, and they'll promote themselves as if it's all or nothing. Like truly all or nothing is a very different case. I think in order to be a successful powerlifter, you have to sacrifice a lot, but I don't think that means you have to sacrifice like familial relationships and like your mental stability. And I think there is a degree of sacrifice that you'll have to give physically, but like learning moderation will improve you in any aspect of your life. And I wish I'd have that approach as a lifter.
I think a lot of that also that mentality, like even those people that you're quoting who we listened to that on that powerlifting motivation video, that certain generation of powerlifting, it's like that was really the old school hardcore heads, right? These guys are maniacs, and they just whether it really was, and a lot of for them, it was all in and taking it to this insane extreme with drug use, body weight gain, everything to just lift as much weight as possible and all the injury and all the negative effects in their life that came with it. I think powerlifting is in such a much better place now where it's much more of a positive place and there's a lot more positive influences. But I can see how you, as a young, impressionable kid coming from a difficult background, you hear these guys and these maniacs, these huge, strong behemoths, and you're like, oh, fuck everything, like everything it takes.
Yep.
And, like that. And I never really, to me, it didn't affect me in that way, even though I was watching these guys, I was watching these videos, and I loved powerlifting, but I wasn't head first diving into the deep end in that aspect. And I can see how that, negatively impressed a lot of people at a certain time period.
Yeah. And for me, I think that mentality didn't shift until I had my first couple rounds of major injuries, and I decided to ultimately stop using PEDs. I started using PEDs really young, and it's one of my biggest regrets in life. And I try so hard to get younger lifters to stay away from these things. Look at me. I'm 26. I look fucking 37. I have had so many injuries. I sacrificed my powerlifting career for my powerlifting career. And it's something that, and there's a lot to be said for like, a lot of the times when athletes are using PEDs, that ultimately just becomes kind of a crutch for the other factors that they don't want to dial in. And if you look at drug tests and powerlifting right now, they're pretty much at the same level.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they're pretty much at the same level. It was never that way ever until the last couple of years. You have guys like Jesus, and Jesus has the heaviest fucking raw total ever done, and he's a young man He's in his early 20s, and he's out totaled the greatest powerlifters of all time as a drug tested raw athlete in what is mostly recognized as the strictest standard in all of powerlifting. Like, what does that tell you? That tells you that gap has been bridged. So for
And,
most of you out there,
and just to say, that's also what's made the opportunity, because I've talked about this on almost every episode, of that I never envisioned back in 2015, 2016, 2017, that powerlifting would be as big as it is now. Why? Because the role models, the top figureheads were who they are. Now we have people like this, like Jesus and all these, these tested lifters giving this platform and giving these examples to all these young kids and making it a much more positive thing.
and even the untested athletes at the top, they're not promoting the sport the way that they used to. The untested athletes at the top, all that was promoted was like hardcore, like give everything up, like there's all these like kind of like negatively nuanced things. And like now, like John Hack, Jamal Browner, Danny Grigsby, a lot of these like upper echelon untested guys, like their platform is much more positive. It's much more realistic, but they also stray away from conversations publicly about drugs and things like that. And I have had a very shifted mentality in this. I thought for a long time it was really important for athletes to talk about their usage publicly. But in hindsight, um, we don't always know who's listening, and we don't always know how they're going to take it. And there are people out there who think they're capable of things far beyond what they're actually capable of, and they will do anything to get there. And when they hear their role model talking about using gear, they're going to start probably using gear. That's not to say everybody's that way, but it's probably going to happen in at least a handful of cases. And for me personally, I started to feel responsible for a lot of those things. I talked pretty openly about my drug use for a long time in specifics. And hindsight's 2020, man. I don't know the amount of people who probably fucked themselves up in an attempt to, whether it was be like me or be competitive with me or whatever it was. And I do feel like ultimately people make their own decisions. We have free will, but I do feel a degree of responsibility for those things. And that's kind of why I do so much now on the backside of things. With the WRPF, I'm now the director of development. Initially, I started in this role as the meet director manager, kind of helping meet directors, doing a little more administrative work, more logistical work, and helping meet directors improve. And I still do that, but there's been a big shift because of a lot of systems my team and I have been able to put into place. I want lifters who do make those sacrifices, who put their bodies on the line and their relationships, because that's never going to stop. Lifters aren't ever going to stop sacrificing their bodies, their relationships, their mental health. They're not going to ever stop sacrificing those things. At the very least, what I want for people who are making all these sacrifices is to at least get validated on whatever platform is necessary, whether it's in financial means, in media, in the means of media, whatever it is. I want it to be worth something. I want it to be worth something. And that shift is kind of it's a bottom up change. You have to improve every single level of powerlifting at once if you want that shift to happen holistically. Ultimately, if you want powerlifting to be in its version of a mainstream light, you have to change everything from the bottom up: the local level, state level, the regional level, the national level, and the professional level. And I think that's what we're doing right now in the WRPF. Now, the problem is this federation was a mess for a very long time. And there's a lot of damage control. There are a lot of issues. And it's a hard thing to navigate. And I think we've been doing it pretty well, given the circumstance that we're in. There was the big shift in February, March.
I want to backtrack a little bit more before we get into like the kind of the present day, everything going on. So again, I've known you since 2018, right? We talked about your kind of competitive career, pushing powerlifting, letting it consume you in somewhat of a negative way, but also like the internet persona that you had kind of created, gaining social media traction because you're like this loud, in your face, crazy guy, deadlifting a shitload of weight, getting angry, whatever the hell it is. Um, and rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Even you and I butted heads so much over the years, right? Through that period of 2019, 2020, 2021. It's very like me as a friend, as a whatever, like I'm very proud of the shift that I've seen, and it's very motivating. And for people that have been following you, even that shift, they might not be able to see it as much because you've shifted in a way where it's just like social media is not that important to you anymore. You're not active on social media much anymore, as opposed to being Garrett, who is every single day ranting about a million things. Talk to me about that shift, because I think that can really help a lot of people who are like going through that weird stage of their early teens, trying to find themselves, being this loudmouth, being an asshole, but realize they're getting their feet in the muddy waters, burning bridges and making mistakes. How did you go from that position to reversing your mentality and being who you are now?
So, the truth is, the social media stuff was never really a persona. All of those things are me. The only thing is, that's only a tidbit of the person that I am. I just didn't want to. There were so many issues in powerlifting. I didn't want to expose myself in a way where I had to be vulnerable or I had to be any of those things. So I was just kind of negative most of the time. And it was in a way that I was hoping would have a positive change on the sport as a whole. And in some ways, it did. There were people who listened to the things that I said and changed things in the sport based on things I had said or things that I had called out or, whatever it be. And I think once I started once I started to realize that one, social media doesn't fucking matter. Um, doesn't matter. It can be something that improves some people's lives, whether it be like financially or by means of like community or whatever. But I think for the most part, for most people, social media is probably actually a pretty negative thing. I think it has a lot of negative influences. I think it messes with people's heads. I think it messes with their perceptions of like reality. Um, Especially in the fitness industry. And I know the fitness industry, powerlifting, what like, but they're so closely tied, and so many of the things that are rooted in things like bodybuilding or fitness or whatever else are also rooted inside of powerlifting. The reason the shift really happened was because um, I started to realize that I would meet people, and after meeting them a few times and they got to know me a little better, I would constantly get the same remark of like, "You are not the person I thought you were." But don't get me wrong, like you were never dishonest or projecting, but like there was only so much of yourself that you gave that it was hard to know that there was more positive qualities to you. So I started to see that because I still do my bitches, I still do my rants, I still do that stuff. Um, I did for a long time feel an obligation to social media to give those things more in a less filtered way, in a less um, eloquent way, just to whether it was to be funny or to get more attention or whatever. Um, but I realized that for the most part, the attention that I got for being that way was not positive, even if I thought it was at the time. And I'm not like a positive fucking person, but to be fair, I'm not like I don't believe in false positivity. But by positive, I more so mean productive. And I just realized I was capable of having a greater impact on powerlifting than just being this guy who bitched about stuff. I knew I had the ethic, the capacity, and the knowledge and the experience to actually make a grand change for this sport. And that's all I wanted to do. And I, in 2020, in 2019, like for a couple of years, I was like the best junior lifter in the country at 198. I was the best junior lifter. I was highly competitive with the open class, and I thought it meant something. And then once you stop doing those things, and nobody cares about you anymore. And I've been fortunate enough that I have still been so active inside of the sport in so many ways that I haven't experienced as big of a shift that way. But that can affect people pretty negatively, man. So I've talked to a lot of people who were prominent lifters when I first started, or were prominent lifters uh, in the interim of the time that I started till now. And then once they get hurt or they fall off, like there's always a rant. There's always a rant. Nobody fucking cares about me, blah, blah, blah. And it's like realizing that can be hard. For me, the shift to becoming a better person publicly, I felt like didn't have to be the end of me being honest and me being forward and me calling out bullshit and me being brash. It didn't have to be the end of that, but it did have to be more of who I am. I still don't like to share my personal life on social media. I don't like to share it publicly. I don't like to involve a lot of those things. Some of my past stuff I'm okay with, but like my life is my life. I don't give a fuck what anybody knows about it. As far as powerlifting goes, I love to share these things. I love to share the work that I'm doing. I love to make people a part of it. I love to see people get excited about the changes that we're making. Yeah, it's the shift was necessary, man. I had a very negative relationship with powerlifting. I had a lot of resentment towards basically being an athlete who didn't get what I felt was the recognition I deserved at the time. And I took that out on the internet and ultimately just made a fucking fool of myself. And I regret that. And I try to talk to people now about some of these things and these personas, even if they're not personas, which I think for most people they are. Like for me, it wasn't a persona. It was just I didn't want to give any more of myself. And the problem is it became what people thought was all of me. I'm still a no bullshit guy. I still make people uncomfortable. You know, you've seen it. You've been with me,
and I'm the same way too.
yeah, you've been with me when I've like just said something that everybody's thinking that nobody will say. And it's just like, oh shit. Like you've been with me, like in person when I've done stuff like that. And I'll never stop doing that stuff, but I will do it more eloquently, and I will do it in a way that is at least more. You know, I didn't realize the disrespect that I was giving people when I was doing those things. I didn't realize it. I'm glad I do now.
It's that filter, and I'm friggin' 31, and my wife wants to cut off my tongue half the time because I struggle with that filter and not having that fun out there personality. But to recap some of it, the way that my perception and kind of digestion of all that is when you have an addictive personality, right? You're obsessive and dive headfirst into things. Started as drug addiction early on. Then when it turned to working out and it became your obsession, and when your obsession's not going in whatever direction you want, it can bring down into a negative mindset, drag you down with it, ups and downs, highs and lows. But that kind of revolved around your world a lot. But since you were also focused on pushing powerlifting competitively, and you were still obsessed with powerlifting competitively, although you had these thoughts and these ideas and these rants about it, there wasn't really any action done behind it. It was like, you fuckers go figure out, get it done. Here's the idea. But now, me knowing you and seeing you where you are now, it's like you're in a place where it's like, okay, lifting and competing is behind you. And it's possibly the best thing that could have happened for you because it's improved your mental health and been able to allow you to put all your time and your energy and your obsession and that kind of obsessive mindset into creating these infrastructures, creating proper structure, and bettering the sport of powerlifting. And it's like, look, you and I are talking all the time, and it's like you're go nonstop. And if you had powerlifting competing still in your life, you wouldn't be able to juggle both of those the same way.
No, absolutely not. And the other half of that too is like I've had to like my coaching has taken a major turn negatively in the last 6 months. Since I started this role, and I've tried so hard to hold on to certain things, coaching wise, athlete, like certain clients and things like that. I've tried so hard to hold on to some of these things, and it's like, if I want to accomplish what I want to accomplish, I have to sacrifice some of these things, like coaching, like being a competitive athlete. You know, I've found other outlets. You know, I play pool pretty competitively now, but pool doesn't hurt my body. It doesn't really stress me mentally beyond whatever rack I'm playing at the moment, and it doesn't cost me near as much money as powerlifting did. But in a lot of ways, pool is like as undeveloped as powerlifting is, and it's going through a very similar shift right now. It's actually where a lot of the some of the infrastructural ideas for 2024 have come from. is the change that's happened inside of competitive pool and some of these other niche sports. I turned away from the normal vision of powerlifting. I turned away from it entirely and started looking at other niche sports and how they found their success. And I started kind of revolving it more around that. And right now, we have so many things in the works and so many things that people didn't think were ever going to happen in powerlifting, and more specifically inside of the WRPF. And I don't blame them for thinking that. Powerlifting has let everybody down every single time, every single year that everybody thought there was going to be a big change. And the last couple of years have been really productive for powerlifting as a whole. But, with everything that happened in February, March, it looked like powerlifting was about to take a very negative turn. And I'm happy to say that it doesn't look that way. And I think everybody who is involved in that, federation-wise, has made a really solid shift in the right direction. Everybody. And I think all of that is going to pay massive dividends in the coming years for the success of the sport as a whole. As far as my position now goes, I don't think there's anything else I'd rather be doing. This is what I worked for. Ultimately, yes, like the competitive stuff was really important to me. But, the reason I bitched so much is because I wanted to see these changes happen. And I did play a role in some of those changes happening at the time. But now, as like somebody who's like pretty control oriented and kind of a micromanager, now I get to have a real influence in how these things change. Doing so many things at once does create some gaps, which sucks. But, ultimately, I get to put the systems in place that I want to, that I think are going to help the sport the most. And like I said, there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. There's a lot coming up. There's a lot of changes. And I think that every single federation is going to be working the hardest they've ever worked over the next half decade. And I think we're going to see powerlifting start to move into the position it should have been in 10 years ago. And we'll never be the NFL. We'll never be the NBA. We'll never be soccer. We'll never be MMA. We'll never be those things. There are things from all of those different sports and niches that we can take and incorporate and make a part of what we're doing. But in the grand scheme of things, the actions have to be executed, and people have to stick with. They have to be willing to fail. I'm sure all the things that we're doing, I'm sure some of them will work and some of them won't, and it's gonna suck. But I won't let it deter me. Or hopefully, I get to stay in the position that I'm in if things don't work.
Well, I think timing is everything. And you said something, powerlifting should have been in this position 10 years ago. I don't think it could have been in this position 10 years ago, just because even just the cliches behind women lifting weights, whatever it is, and just the shift of culture and health and all that over the last 10 years has changed as a whole. Even mixed martial arts, everything has grown, and the average Joe participating in all those things. And I think learning curves are super important and are inevitable, and those bumps along the way. And like what I told a lot of people when I was in the administrative role I was in before the WRPF is the WRPF was literally, it was just like the groundwork, right? There was no structure. There's like some rough blueprints, no materials even yet, just laying to the side, but nothing's built yet. But there's a foundation, and it's a good foundation. They had tried building before and things didn't work out. So now it was at that point where things can just slowly build from the ground up. And when you're building from the ground up for the first time, things along the way don't always work out, and you have to shift, and you have to, change things along the way if you're not an experienced architect who has done this, your entire life. So I think, the right people are in the right position to learn some of those, those learning curves and learn from it. And the sport right now and fitness right now is in the best possible place it could ever be to grow so as substantially as it has been. Like I said, literally, this has been my career for a very long time. I started this as a career in 2012, right? So over 10 years. And 2015, 2016, when I dove in from CrossFit into powerlifting and, was doing my thing, taking people to USPA meets all around Florida and stuff like that. I was like, the same way I viewed CrossFit. I'm like, how much longevity is in there in this? Like how
Well,
long is this CrossFit gym going to be here? I don't know. I don't know. And I thought the same thing about powerlifting. Now I was right about CrossFit because CrossFit took that turn and it doesn't have that same relevance. But powerlifting with the ease of accessibility and all these, influential figures that aren't like, the Rich Fronings and stuff that people know they're never going to be able to do all those things. It sets a much more realistic goal for people to try to reach for,
right. And even on the competitive side of things, this is the only sport that everybody can get objectively good at. We know exactly what it takes to get good at this sport. It requires consistency. It requires level-headedness. It requires a degree of sacrifice in nutrition and sleep and the factors surrounding productive performance in the gym. Everybody can get good at this sport with enough time. It doesn't matter how weak you are when you start. It doesn't matter what lifestyle factors you have. If you're willing to put in the effort to improve in this sport, you will improve in this sport. You can do this sport, and the other thing is, it's a sport you can do forever. And we have age groups, we have weight classes, we have different divisions, we have different equipment categories. There are dozens of ways to maintain competitiveness and to improve, no matter how long you're doing this, no matter how old you are, how young you are, how fat you are, how skinny you are, the color of your skin, or where you come from. It's the only sport that everybody can get objectively good at on some scale, whether it's local, state, regional, national, pro, world, whatever. Everybody has an opportunity and the same resources to get objectively good at it. And it's something I say to people. So, like, how often do we talk about most people don't make it more than 2 years? And that's because most people hit their first roadblock after quote unquote newbie games, and they don't know what to do, and they don't want to continue to make certain sacrifices, and they stop, which I hate. It's a sport with enough time, you will get good at it if you're constantly moving in a productive direction, if you're real with yourself, if you can acknowledge when certain things aren't working, or when you've made mistakes, or when your coaches made mistakes, and if they can acknowledge that. If those things can happen, you can get good at this. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you come from. I don't care about any of those other factors. Anybody can go to this sport. There's a balance for sure. Some people want to do it really, really, really fast, and like I did. They want to do it really fast. They feel like they don't have time. But, like, man, as men, our athletic prime doesn't really come until, between the ages of, on average, of 28 and 32, 33, 34. And women, it can be anywhere between 25 and 45. Everybody has, and there are outliers to those numbers as well. Everybody has an opportunity to get good at this. And I think you made a good point that the fitness industry, powerlifting, is in the best place it could possibly be in right now. And what's cool about that is there is still room to grow. There is still room to improve that attribute even further. And I'm ecstatic to be a part of that. I mean, ecstatic. Like every federation, there's really only been a few federations that have done certain things that are attributes of other sports that need to be carried over here, like the seasonal path. Federations have done it, and federations have let it go, and some feds are losing that. Some feds are bringing that back. And then if you look at the professional side, we have to find a way to treat professional athletes, even in a sport like powerlifting, like professional athletes, and they have to act like professional athletes. There has to be that shift. I get it. Why would I act professional if I'm getting nothing for it? Well, here's the thing, guys. Every single sport had to start somewhere. Every single discipline had to start somewhere. And if the athletes don't start acting like professionals, and if the organizations don't start treating athletes like professional, we're never going to find that point. We're never going to find it. So that's where, we have had a lot of positive change in the last 3 years, mostly on the drug tested side, but that shift is now happening on the untested side. I think a lot of the role models and a lot of the upper echelon lifters are becoming more positive role models, not rooted in false positivity. And sometimes the intention behind, so maybe selfish. They may want more social media notoriety. They may want better sponsors. They will maybe want people to think they're better people than they are. But regardless, as far as the scope goes, if those things that are happening on the public side of things are becoming more positive and more professional, it's going to be easier to enact that change as a whole. It is a duty that falls on the lifters and the organizations equivalently. Um, Now it's just now, as the athletes have done their job in becoming more professional, the organizations have to do more in treating them professional. And I think the WRPF is starting to do that. I think the USAPL is starting to do that. I think the USPA is starting to do that. I think the IPF is starting to do that. It's ultimately just going to be kind of a little rat race, and who gets it done first, who does it the best way, and who gets the most attention for it. And I'm happy to be a part of that competitive field. I love it. I can't wait to win, and I can't wait to lose, because all it's going to do is drive all of these things even further. It's just going to drive everybody up to do a better job, to be more competitive, to do more for the lifters, and to give more for the lifters. And all of that is gonna change the sport. It's not gonna change next year. Some of these things might start happening in the next year. But as far as the way the sport is perceived by the general public, that'll be 5 to 10 years. A lot of people don't have the vision or the ambition to buckle down and do those things for that period of time. I do. I know that I do. And I will not be deterred. I will not. I gave up a lot of my life for this sport. And I'm one of the very few people who, in doing that, has had positive recourse. And for me, it's my role, my current role. I have a unique job in a unique niche field that I am able to live off of. And not a lot of people get that opportunity. And I have an opportunity, and I have to make the best of it.
Just to speak on one thing from a business perspective, for all you like listeners, athletes, whatever it is that, think maybe that it's easier said than done. The whole thing that Garrett just spoke about regarding treating athletes like professionals, paying athletes, whatever that may be, right? If you look at all these big organizations, whether it's UFC, NFL, whatever it is, those governing bodies, which could be the equivalent of a WRPF, any event that's done by under that organization is ran only by the organization. What's difficult with powerlifting is there's all these sub entities, all these people operating under this as their own. So from a financial aspect, what that means is that money's not pooling all in one place, right? That money's pooling in a million different people. How's it going to, if it was pooled in that one place at the NFL, that's how that money's determined to split out, right? So it's a very difficult thing, that argument of, treat the powerlifters like professionals, put them on a salary. There's only so much money in this one place because it's split in so many other different directions. If you look at the first shift that's happened, right, the Sheffield, right, amazing success. And what also these other organizations have are they also, besides the money that comes in the organization via, admission, whatever the hell it may be, there's also the sponsorship deals, right? Powerlifting, we don't have enough big brands and big money in it yet. I say big yet because I feel like that's going to shift more and more with the viewership, with the notoriety, with everything that comes behind it. A meet like the Sheffield was able to be put on with literally only one supporting sub-organization, sub-brand, I should say, one sponsorship brand. That's SBD. Something that the Ghost Clash that Garrett and I are putting together last year raised $50,000. Our goal is to, exceed that this year. That's us needing to pool from a bunch of different organizations. The Sheffield had it cost over $300,000 to put on. And that was all funded by one organization, and that's SBD. And SBD is the biggest organization in powerlifting because they're in so many other markets also. So it's a long road, but we're going down the right road. 10 years ago, SBD only started 10 years ago, right? I was able to do a tour of SBD, meet the owner and the founder. In 10 years, they've gotten to where they are today. All these other brands possibly on those trajectories of growth that are then going to put back in and support the sport. If there's enough of that growth in all those different directions, That's how I foresee it being able to get to that
Yep,
professional aspect. But it
absolutely.
can't happen overnight. There's so many moving parts, so many different factors. It hurts your head to think
Yep.
about.
Yeah, and to touch on that, the other thing you have to understand, and when I was talking about athletes acting like professionals, if we were to get those sponsorship deals that are going to generate the revenue to make these things happen, we have to make this sport spectator friendly. No one's going to put their money into something that people aren't watching, and people are less likely to watch for a plethora of factors. Whether it's they don't understand it, or the athletes are are they're not relatable, or whatever it is. Um, we have to make this sport more spectator friendly. We have to find a way to get people involved in the viewership of this sport who don't necessarily do it. And I know how unrealistic that may sound, but that was an unrealistic objective for every sport ever. Other sports have become more accessible. Basketball, football, soccer, baseball, hockey. Those sports are pretty accessible. But like if you look at the UFC, for example, like most people don't fight. And look at what's happened to them. And you know what? You talked earlier about kind of feeder organizations and all these different entities that exist as governing bodies inside of powerlifting. MMA still has that. There are tons of feeder feds all over the fucking world. We have professional state organizations just in one state. Like, I mean, multiple of them. They're quote unquote pro. And then there's amateur organizations, there's underground organizations, there's so much of it. And one organization has been able to dominate a majority of the market. And powerlifting is going to have to follow that path in some degree. There will have to come a point where everybody recognizes that there is one organization at the top, and that's where we have to go from. The tricky part is the drug tested versus non tested thing. And balancing that balancing act is going to be the hardest part. It's going to be the hardest freaking part. Um, and that's where the IPF and the USAPL, they have their advantages. They're the only federations that are totally drug tested. If you want to make the combined aspect of those two work, you have to bring an even better product to the field. And that's kind of what I'm tasked with doing. And I'm going to do my very freaking best, guys. Some of the events that I have planned and things I'm trying to do, my involvement in events like the Ghost Clash and the American Pro and some other stuff. That's the whole objective, is to make things more spectator friendly and give spectators and sponsors the opportunity to find value in what it is that we do. And it's a hard thing to do, man. These pitches that I have to write and these emails I have to send, it's a tricky thing to navigate, man. But I think we can do it. I just think we all have to work together, even if it's not necessarily directly. We all have to have the same objective, and we have to take this competitive aspect of the inside of the organizations, and we have to let everybody improve on their own, and we have to improve on our own, organization by organization. And we just got to duke it out over the next 10 years and find out who's going to be at the top. And right now I think the top is as vague as it's ever been. I think it's been very easy to identify who the top organization is for the last decade. I think the last 2 years has become the most vague it's ever been. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But if you look purely from an objective standpoint, there are aspects of each federation that other federations do not have. Good ones. And there are also bad ones. Identifying who the top organization is doesn't just come down to numbers of competitors or numbers of meets or prize money or production value or whatever sponsors they have. There are so many factors involved. I think it is vague. I think there is still a top and a second and a third and a fourth, but I think they're a lot closer than they've ever been. And I'm excited to see who comes out on top. And as far as my role in that, I'm going to deliver. I may not deliver in a way that's successful, but I'm gonna deliver on what I want to do as best as I can do it. And like I said, I'm not gonna be deterred. I have, you pointed this out. I have had quite the shift in my demeanor, in my mentality, in the way I speak, in the way I do things. That's because I'm not gonna get anybody to fucking agree with me or give me the money that I need to do these events if I'm out here being a fucking shitbag. It's not gonna happen. And I haven't let any part of myself go. I have not let go of that outspoken, brash, forward person. That person is not gone. That person is not gone at all. That person's still here and still talks his shit, man. He does. But there is a way to do it, and there's a way to navigate that water in a way that I'm not sinking my ship.
And I have this argument with my wife all the time that I tell her it's like you can't change your identity and you can't change how you're wired and who you are, right? You can just learn how to control things better, handle things better, and more professionally, maturely, however you want to say it. You know what I mean? But impulses are still going to be impulses, reactions are still going to be reactions, and you're still going to be how you are. But the take away also PEDs and stuff like that out of the aspect that exaggerate certain tendencies and how people can be. It also helps you handle composure a lot more.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the best decisions I ever made was to stop using PEDs, for a plethora of reasons. But more than anything, it was the clarity. The clarity a couple years back when I decided to really curb the use, and then a little over a year ago to stop as a whole, made an amazing difference. And I think that it's something that everybody should try to move towards. You can't melt your brain and alter your brain chemistry and operate at a level that really helps you function in society.
Yep.
There are some who are capable of it, of course. But speaking to the majority of that bell curve, most people can't, and you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge the ways that people have been destructive in their own lives, whether it be professionally, or in their emotional relationships, in their private life, in their whatever aspect of life it is. Like, I don't think for most people PEDs help anything. If anything, they make things worse. And you want to talk about from a lifter's perspective, they decrease your longevity, they increase your likelihood for injury. And how many of you guys out there who have used PEDs when you are quote unquote cycling off, do you feel like you're not as strong as you were before? Do you, and then on top of that, deal with the chemical change that impacts that even further? I mean, we have to start taking responsibility for things that we are doing in our own lives. And me doing that was the best thing that's ever happened to me.
I love it. So to wrap things up, we talked a lot about, very vaguely as a whole, changes in organization, changes in the sport, a long-term path to make powerlifting on top. But short-term, what can you share with us? What do you feel comfortable talking about that are in the works, going to be announced soon, have been announced, like regionals, for example, and things like that?
Yeah. So in 2024, we are dropping 7 to 8 regional championship events. These events will be tied in with our national and pro scale. Basically, if you're under a certain qualifying dot score, you have to hit a certain score at a regional event to qualify for nationals. And then if you win your regional event, you get if you win your weight class in the regional event, you have a reserve spot for nationals. If you are the best lifter at your regional event, you get to compete in nationals for free. You don't have to pay an entry fee in 2024. And we're going to carry that same thing over to nationals. If you win nationals, you will get to compete in the American Pro for free. You get a guaranteed spot in the American Pro that you will not have to pay entry for. And we're even talking about maybe even expanding on. And the other thing that we are going to be doing, and then I'll talk about a couple of things. I'll just have to be a little vague. We are going to make our professional league that so many people have tried and so many people have failed on, and we even could. But we found a way to do it that doesn't require any extra work from anybody except for us. All you guys have to do is compete in a certain amount of meets, not even an amount, a certain couple of meets, just one of them, and you will be included in our WRP league and how we're approaching that. And I'll announce, there'll be more specific details coming up on that. And then we're working on being in line in a lot of ways with the standards of drug tested organizations, even outside of powerlifting. And then our kind of recalling back to our pro events, we are going to try to make the first truly pro event that truly treats lifters like professional athletes. I think a lot of people like yourself have contributed a lot to setting the tone for that. As far as whether it's production value, lifter experience, standard, whatever. But there is more that we can do, and we're going to do it. Permitting, again, that we can get the funding. It's not an easy thing to do. And people think that these organizations just have a shitload of money. People try to do math on entry fees. What people don't understand is meet directors are independent contractors. We don't get entry fee money as an organization. We get the sanction fee. And the sanction fee it's not just like pure profit. We have insurance, we have logistics, we have employees, we have all kinds of overhead and expenses. Like, we don't get the money people think we're getting. What we have to do is gather that money, and we have to give sponsors and investors a reason to give us that money, to invest in us and to invest in our vision. It's not an easy thing to do. A lot of you guys work in other industries, and you guys know that stuff. You have to understand that it's the exact same for us. We have to create the space for those things to happen. And then, nationals this year is huge. And we have 410 lifters over the course of 3 days. Most of the days are going to be 3 sessions. And we're going to do our very best to handle this change inside of the WRPF to create an amazing event and really show people how hard we've been working on the back end to give people a better version of the WRPF. And I hope we can do that. I do. I think we can. I think we're doing it the best we can. And everyone is working really hard. And the people who were in place before have worked really hard. And we should take things to another level. And we're going to do that. I think those are the biggest things is regionals, nationals, the league, all the stuff that we're doing. I'm excited to show everybody all the work we've been putting in.
Hell yeah, man. Little by little, the things have been coming out. I hope you guys were excited to hear some of these new teasers and the new things that are in the works. Like Garrett said, the team, they're nonstop behind the scenes. They're working on these things. 6 weeks, I think, now until nationals. It's going to be the best WRPF nationals yet. And like you said, for 2024, it's only going to grow more. So super excited to see all that stuff. Very excited to be out there in nationals. I think that's when we'll be seeing each other next. And thank you, Garrett. Let everyone know where they could find you besides nationals in 6 weeks, and we'll sign off.
Yeah. I'll be at nationals in 6 weeks. I will be at the American Pro. I'll be at every single pro event in 2023 and 2024 for the rest of the time. I'll be at all of our regional championship events in 2024, and those will be announced soon. The first one's going to be in Arizona in January, and we'll have some more announcements about that soon. If you guys want to find me on social media, my Instagram's my name, Garrett.fear, but there's a CI before Garrett, like cigarette, little double entendre there. You guys can find me there. If anybody has any questions regarding the WRPF, send an email to contact@wrpf.com. We have just put out our new rulebook. It's a beautiful thing. We worked hard on this thing for, basically 6 months, but really in depth for about 4. And I think we have created the single most cohesive rulebook in all of powerlifting. And we'll have a lot more things to come. Thank you guys for listening.
Hell yeah. Thank you guys for joining us and tuning into this week's episode of the WRPF podcast.